Well, he is the presumptive nominee. President Biden won the Democratic primary this year. He has secured pledged delegates for the convention in August. That means that they are pledged to him, but they're not committed to him. That means when he goes to the convention, the Democratic delegates will vote for him to be the nominee. That's how it's set up. On the Republican side, the former president has won the primary and his delegates are locked in. In other words, it would be difficult under the rules for them to vote for anybody else. For President Biden, the rules are different. So they are pledged to him. And he's won the vast majority of the 4,000 delegates who will be on voting in the first round at the convention in Chicago, which begins on August 19th. Ahead of the convention, there really aren't any rules because the convention is set up to nominate the president. Unless President Biden were to say, I'm not running anymore, somebody else is going to have to be nominated for president, then you would have to come up with a way to pick who that person would be. And right now you hear a lot of discussion about that because President Biden has been considered someone who might end up not being on the ticket because of his various gaffes and his poor debate performance and questions about his mental fitness. But there is really nothing set up. There have been talks about having some kind of a speed primary, talks about the delegates picking the nominee themselves, all kinds of questions about what would happen. But right now, President Biden says he's not stepping aside. So it would be very difficult for the party to just pick somebody else right now, even though he's not locked in. He is the presumptive nominee. So they don't have really a plan to do that. But one thing that's interesting about this is that the party is planning on having a virtual meeting where they may nominate President Biden ahead of the convention. In other words, they may vote to lock him in before he even sets foot on the stage at the convention in Chicago. So that's a pretty big deal. They're talking about doing this, and they're also discussing how they would do it. Would all the delegates would vote online in a virtual meeting. Hopefully it would be open to the public. They're doing this because they believe that they need to beat an August 7th deadline in Ohio for their ballot choice for November. But Ohio changed the law, and now that deadline is actually September. So there's really no need for them to have this ahead of time nomination, but they're planning to do it anyway. So we're going to keep our eye on that. Yes, they can. However, it's unlikely. As I said at the beginning, he's a presumptive nominee, and the vast majority of the 4,000 delegates from the primary are pledged to him. However, they're not committed to him. And under the Democratic rules, they could feasibly vote for somebody else when they vote for their nominee, be it the virtual nomination that I was just discussing, or whether they do it in person in Chicago. The reason I don't think that's likely is the party delegates are loyalists to Biden. They were handpicked by Biden to be loyal to him. So it would be difficult to see the vast majority of them turning against the president now after they are his delegates. They're there for him. So it seems like it's unlikely that that would happen. Well, they'd have to vote for somebody else. And so he could say, maybe the president would say, well, I recommend Vice President Kamala Harris. That would add a lot of weight to her winning the nomination. Wouldn't guarantee it, though. You'd have to have a vote of the delegates. Now, the way that rule works is they would all vote, and if they can't decide on someone on the first round of votes, a second round happens, and then you add additional people who can vote. And those are the super delegates. Those are party leaders, past presidents, past party officials that get to vote. And there's more than 700 of them. So eventually they'd have to come up with somebody, and they'd keep voting till somebody wins. Of course, the leading contenders are, Kamala Harris, the vice president, some prominent Democratic governors, the transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, all kinds of names floated around. Basically, what the delegates would pick. there was talk of some kind of a speed primary. Some donors were talking about that, just setting them up in various states and having these primaries. That reflects a concern that voters aren't going to be super happy that a bunch of delegates are now picking the nominee after they all voted for Biden. But the primary wasn't really open for delegates. It was set up in a way to make sure Biden was the nominee. So it's not like they really had many choices to begin with. They had Biden and pretty much nobody else really who was viable. Well, as I said earlier, they can go rogue. The rules allow it, but they are loyal to Biden, so it's unlikely enough of them would be able to do it to push Biden out, unless between now and then there are events that might question even further whether he can do the job. I don't question whether there will be some excitement at the convention, given the state of play with President Biden right now. But at this point, the only way it would be an open convention is if Biden steps aside. That's the most likely scenario for it to become an open convention. Otherwise, it'd be real tough to get these delegates to push him off the ticket. Yes, they would. They certainly would. And because if Biden is off the ticket, say, they would be in charge of helping figure out the rules for picking the new leader of the ticket. They would have a major influence on who it is. The delegates would vote for it, but the leadership would have a lot of sway in who it becomes the new nominee. Well, certainly, if they push Biden off and then say they decided they didn't really want to have Vice President Harris leading the ticket because of her poll numbers, and they passed over her for, say, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, there would be anger in the base. But it would ultimately depend on the performance of that candidate against Donald Trump. I mean, these things aren't held in a vacuum. So as soon as the nominee were in place and that ticket started to run, you'd have to see how the base responds to it. And certainly there'd be resentment if Harris was pushed off the ticket. She's the first female vice president. She's the first vice president of color on ever in history. So this wouldn't sit well with many people in the Democratic Party base. Well, there's new candidates out there. They're already out there. The question is whether Biden will step aside. As of today, no, I don't see Biden stepping aside. We've heard from him several times now in recent days saying that he is not going anywhere. And he doesn't, he's only sounded more forceful as the days go by, and he's actually working really hard to get the leadership behind him. So I don't see that at the moment, but of course, this is an ever-changing situation. Oh, Vice President Harris is certainly a top contender. In fact, I think she is it. First of all, you don't want to lose Harris from the ticket because the money goes with her, and that ticket has raised a lot of money. They need it. They need all that cash. They'd be really hard pressed to try to catch up now if they had to have a whole new ticket. But there are some other people out there. You need somebody else on the ticket. Josh Shapiro, as I mentioned, Pennsylvania governor. Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary. Gavin Newsom, obviously, has been talked about is governor of California. All these people who are sort of like the next generation of leaders in the party, whose names have been circulated as possible replacements for Biden. And it makes it very exciting. At this point, it seems like Biden is not going anywhere, but there's still a lot of concern in the party about him, and that makes the situation a little bit unpredictable.